Joining us right now, however, on the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line is my colleague from the NFL Media Group and a man who sat in this chair just a couple weeks ago while I was in Pittsburgh, PA, to call the proceedings between the Raiders and the Steelers on Christmas Eve night. Our friend Tom Pelissero back here on the Rich Eisen Show. Tom, good day to you. What can you tell me? What do you know at all about Damar Hamlin as you and I are talking about 20 minutes after 12 Cincinnati time on Tuesday?
Well, I think probably most of your audience was sleeping, and I otherwise would have been. There were a statement from the Bills as well as an NFL conference call around 1 or 2 a.m. Eastern time. First, the Bills put out the statement saying Damar Hamlin suffered a cardiac arrest following that tackle last night. Heartbeat was restored on the field and then got transferred to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center for further testing and treatment. And then the NFL also held a conference call talking through all of the things that played out, because I think that a lot of times, Rich, in the absence of information, people fill in the gaps on their own. And certainly I, as a viewer, and I imagine many other people, were watching and just trying to, whether it was lip read or read body language or figure out what exactly was taking place during those ongoing discussions on the field. So first off, when Damar Hamlin gets taken off the field in an ambulance, which we've all seen that before, and you wait for hours later or a day later, and the word that it was precautionary movement, all the extremities, going to be okay, we'll be going home soon. This was something different, and I got so many calls and texts from people who were either there in Cincinnati last night or agents who had talked to their players, and there were many different versions that I heard of what exactly players saw. And I'm certainly not going to indulge in giving a bunch of different secondhand information, but what I would tell you is the theme was players saw something last night with Damar Hamlin that they have never seen before on a football field. They saw one of their teammates literally die on the field and be brought back by medical personnel who restarted his heart. There is a emergency action plan in every stadium around the NFL that is actually rehearsed on an annual basis, even though, there are very few occasions that rise to this level precisely, a cardiac arrest on the field. There's an ambulance at every stadium. There's an airway management physician at every stadium if a player stops breathing, which, again, not something that you ever see. But in this case, a player goes into cardiac arrest and they needed to get him on oxygen. And then there's a level 1 trauma center in every city, which is where Damar Hamlin was rushed to at the University of Cincinnati Medical Center to get him the best possible care. So all that takes place. And you can certainly see the looks on the faces of the players, of the coaches, of everyone involved. There was that conversation between the referee, Sean Smith, and both of the head coaches on the field. And what we were told on the conference call with the league last night was the NFL, the command center, was actually listening in through Sean Smith's microphone to the conversation. And at that point, the conversation was not, despite what was said on the broadcast, which is the normal protocol after an injury delay, that there's a warm-up period and then you resume the game. The conversation, according to the NFL, and specifically the Executive Vice President of Football Operations, Troy Vincent, was about, you guys can head back to the locker room, take as much time as you need, make sure your players, make sure everyone is okay, and we're going to discuss what exactly to do here. Because remember, Rich, the NFL didn't stop during a global pandemic. They had free agency 3 days later. They didn't lose a single game during COVID. So even the possibility of a game being suspended for the night or not being finished, it doesn't happen ever within the league. So within about 30 minutes there, you saw both head coaches come back out of the locker rooms, get on the phone with Roger Goodell, and that decision was made collaboratively to suspend the game for the night. The NFL is not commenting on when the game could be resumed. There were no updates on anything else so far this morning from the league. The focus remains on the health of Damar Hamlin, and in the coming hours and days, that's going to dictate the NFL's course of action here at a time that they were supposed to be gearing up for a big Week 18 headed into the playoffs.
Tom Pelissero of NFL Network, NFL Media Group here on the Rich Eisen Show. You just laid a lot out there. Let's take it one at a time. So, the general sense just watching it and seeing the faces of these players and how they were, staring at what was happening and then many of them turning away from what was happening and reacting in such an emotional way, crying, like sobbing is the only words for it. And based on what you were gathering from other agents talking about what their players or clients were reporting back, that Damar Hamlin was dead on the field and his life was saved, at least for the time being, when we're hoping for good. Saved his life. That happened last night on a football field on Monday Night Football, Tom.
It did. And as much as you see the emergency medical care in so many other situations, whether, on that same field 3 months ago, Tua Tagovailoa left in an ambulance with probably the most devastating concussion that many of us have ever seen. But you still, by that night, he's flying back with the team and he's okay. We become all too accustomed to this idea that players are invincible to a certain degree. Even injuries that 20, 30 years ago, torn ACLs and patellar tendon injuries and things like that were career-ending, you're just now thinking, well, medicine and rehab have advanced to such a point that, this guy will be back. Boy, that sucks for the team that they just lost that player, but 8 months from now, he'll be back out there and he'll be good as new. And then you have something like last night. It's not an orthopedic injury. It's not even a concussion, which, of course, is a very serious injury as well. It's, in essence, a heart attack on the field. And whatever it was that happened on that impact, that was another thing that I had a longtime executive for a team call me like midnight last night, 1 a.m., who was just saying that just wasn't a big hit. It wasn't a violent type of collision. Derwin James hits Ashton Doolin the previous week. You looked at that play and you went, oh my goodness, like that was a bad, violent collision. This was, it's NFL football. It's unlike anything you or me are ever going to experience, Rich, but it was a hit like 20, 30, 40 other hits in every game. It was, he absorbed the contact, he went down, he popped back up, briefly tried to either grab his mouthpiece or adjust his face mask, and then collapsed. So, very quickly, again, I think even players, when you play in the NFL, you accept the reality that you're putting, your body on the line. And players, often say putting your life on the line. There's been, one example in NFL history of a player dying on the field, and it was in early 1970s. And it was a player who suffered from a undiagnosed heart condition and collapsed on the field and was taken away. They finished that game in Chicago, and then he was pronounced dead that evening. But that was 50 years ago. No one has ever seen anything like this on the field. And so, absolutely, and again, without getting into the details, there were certain signs present that this was something much worse. And when players looked at Damar Hamlin on the field, they could tell, even before CPR was initiated, that this was not the guy had a concussion or something else is taking place. This was something really bad. And so, I can only imagine you're watching one of your friends, and by all accounts, a great guy, and Damar Hamlin being resuscitated and having his heart restarted. That's why they have the, whatever you call them, I can't remember the acronym, but those shocking tools. That's why you have those on hand. That's why you have trained people and the airway pathway physician and all those things is for this moment. And, that you train on those things, but you don't train players for that. You don't have a period in training camp that's, okay, your teammate has a heart attack, here's what we're going to do. And I think that's the other takeaway for me from last night, that we can all sit in the comfort of our homes and say, why wasn't the game canceled immediately? What took so long? It was all within an hour. And this isn't me defending the NFL. It's just saying the reality is, as much as you train for these worst-case scenarios, you hope you never see them. And everyone involved last night saw something that they had never seen before. and that hopefully we'll never see again.
Well, I mean, and I'd imagine, Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show, there's no protocol for when to restart play when somebody's been resuscitated on the field and taken off via ambulance. And so let's hit that part of the conversation, because that is definitely, despite Troy Vincent, the league executive who spoke via conference call last night, calling the notion that the league was insisting the players get back on the field within 5 minutes ridiculous. The broadcast at ESPN, our friend and colleague Joe Buck was mentioning multiple times that the league has said, there's a 5-minute warm up and we'll resume play. We saw Stephon Diggs gather the Bills, and it did seem like he was, delivering a speech to say, let's go out there. And, you saw Burrow warming up. But after a while, it was obvious that the players weren't into that idea. And then they go back to the locker room. Based on your reporting and conversations with agents who never really turned down a chance to criticize the league when given an opportunity, based in my experience, did any of them tell you that the players told them that the league insisted they get back on the field within 5 minutes of that happening? Did you hear anything like that, Tom?
My understanding was more nuanced than that. You have, in general, protocols for a warm-up period after an extended injury delay. Mm-hmm. And again, that's commonplace with even serious injuries. I mean, back in week 2, I was in Buffalo for the Monday night game. That was the night that there was the doubleheader, the Bills versus the Titans and the Eagles versus the Vikings, so half the country may not have been watching. But Dane Jackson, another Bills defensive back, actually 2 Bills defensive backs in that game, suffered neck injuries. The second one, ambulance was on the field. There was an extended delay. It was extraordinarily frightening. And in fact, last night I stumbled across a quote from Damar Hamlin about watching Dane Jackson and his brother being on the field and what that felt like. Yet 15 minutes later, 20 minutes later, whatever it was, the football continued. And the fans were cheering and the players were going after it and doing touchdown celebrations and everything else. Again, you become hardened to this idea that no matter what, the game is going to go on. Mm-hmm. So last night, I'm not surprised that whether it is various people in the command center, remember, there's always a communication to the TV broadcast, too. That's why you got the guy with the orange gloves on the field.
That's right.
They're all communicating, okay, what's going to take place here? Mm-hmm. What's being communicated in that moment? And again, I don't speak on behalf of the league here, Rich. This is just my understanding of course. How the situation would work.
Neither do I. We're just two guys who are talking about it.
Exactly. You're proceeding as if this is going to go like every other injury, right. Ever. Right. And you're becoming aware, though, that it's not. And at some point, too, remember this, and I know that, Troy Vincent referenced this on the call last night, that, he said he's never seen anything like it. And how do you resume play after you've seen such a traumatic event occur right in front of you in real time? And at some point, both mentally and physically, as well as emotionally, it does become dangerous to put players back on the field. We've had weather delays, we've had other things, and there's always that worry of guys, just cramping up and things like that. But then on top of that, our players put at a greater injury risk because their heads are not in the game, because they just witnessed one of their brothers die and come back to life and leave in an ambulance in front of them. All those things have to be taken into consideration. There are things in the policies and procedures within the NFL about making up games, continuing games. To my knowledge, there's no example of a game. This isn't baseball where you make it up, the next time you play, right. Play the last 7 innings and then play the second game. You can't do that. I'm not aware of any situation or any precedent for doing this. Then you put on top of that the fact that these are 2 teams that are certainly going to the playoffs. It impacts the number 1 seed in the AFC. They both have another game coming up now in 5 days. Football is clearly not the important thing, and right. That's where the league has not made any statements whatsoever. I would certainly ascertain that they're having logistical conversations about, depending what happens with Damar Hamlin, what do we do here? And the later we get into the week, the harder it is to believe that there's some solution where you're going to jam in the rest of this game and then keep the rest of the schedule on track. And those are all conversations that will continue as we hopefully, I think we're all hoping and praying that we get positive updates on Damar Hamlin here in the coming hours and days.
Tom Pelissero here on the Rich Eisen Show. A couple more minutes left with my NFL Media Group colleague, insider, and occasional fill-in host here on the Rich Eisen Show. And again, the whole idea of what happens to this game. Clearly, we're still in. We're not there yet. And clearly the question is when will the Bills be there yet? And I don't know who determines when that time needs to happen, but time is still a luxury that the league has, I think, because there's also a bye week that exists later on in the first week of February. I understand there's the Pro Bowl and the reimagined Pro Bowl games, but if we need to have a championship weekend that weekend, because a week needs to be utilized now, that might be where we go. And the question is how does the rest of the league feel about that? I can only imagine, as I'm looking up right now and I'm seeing Mike Tomlin talking. I don't have the sound up because obviously I'm talking to you. There's no doubt in my mind he is sitting here thinking about Damar Hamlin, as are the Steelers, as are all 32. And I can only imagine that this is a process that needs to be played out for a while. There's no question. I'm just laying that out for you just to have a conversation on this front. Tom.
Well, and I go back to, and again, I understand this is not a perfect comparison, but you remember amidst COVID, really in 2021, even more when Omicron hit, and there was that wave of hundreds of positive cases in December of 2021,
mm-hmm.
and no one knew how they were going to proceed. And so there was discussion, as there had been the previous year too, about at least conceptually what would have been in 2020 week 18, what would have been last year week 19, and whether at some point the schedule became so stressed that you needed to move things around. Back in 2020, remember, they moved bye weeks on teams. They changed games around, but they did not ever push the entire thing back. And that's always been a last resort for the league. But again, we're in, just like it was with COVID, we're in uncharted territory here. I would think the league would like to make decisions on this by the end of the day, if humanly possible, but you may not have the types of medical answers that you want on Damar Hamlin by the end of the day. It's also Tuesday. This would be the day that the 4 teams playing on Saturday would be having at least a walkthrough or some type of organized team activities
mm-hmm.
leading into a game week. And then tomorrow, the other 28 teams, over a dozen of which have something on the line in week 18, they would be back on the practice field. It's an extraordinarily complicated situation. I think that just based on the outpouring of support on social media and elsewhere from fellow players and the conversations that I've had personally with a variety of people around the league, people are shaken by this. They also are very cognizant of the fact that the NFL historically does not stop for anyone or anything. It did last night for Damar Hamlin, and how it starts again remains up in the air.
Tom Pelissero, thank you so much for your time, your knowledge, your compassion, and greatly appreciate it. We'll chat again soon.
Thanks for having me, Rich.
At Tom Pelissero on Twitter, joining us here on the Rich Eisen Show.